one of the myths that you put in I think in yesterday's talk was that regulators from the banking side don't go with FIDO or don't like the idea of FIDO. I'm interested in that conversation, because that is definitely the conversation that I have to have next is how do I convince, FDIC, who is traditionally running off of 2016 guidelines. How do you get into, how do you make that buy-in?
Yes. So there's a couple of things here. There's regulators and compliance officers. Oh my.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Steadman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
Doing fantastic. I mean, we're here at Identiverse 2024. Great sessions, great podcasting environment, great guests.
Great podcast.
And great lunch.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't eat lunch.
Yeah, you missed out, man.
Okay. Well, sorry. I had a kind bar for lunch. That's about what I had time for. As well as our guest, Andrew Shikiar, had a kind bar as well. So we're sharing the kindness. Want to give a shout out to RSM and Cyber Risk Alliance for hooking us up, being able to do this. So shout out to them. Let's get to it. Andrew, this is your 7th time on the show. You're the executive director of the FIDO Alliance. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
Yeah. This is becoming like an annual occurrence where we talk with you at Identiverse, and then we talk with you later in the year again around Authenticate time.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think those two shows for us at FIDO Alliance are kind of serve as two kind of milestones or mileposts, if you will, throughout the years, fall and spring. Mm-hmm. So we generate a lot of our deliverables around these two events, and it's a good time to engage with the broader identity community.
So this is your 7th time on the show. Why is this something that you keep coming back to? Why do you keep subjecting yourself to the torture?
Because the hosts are so amazing.
Go on.
They're so amazing. I don't know where to begin. How much time do we have? First, I do really enjoy talking to the two of you. It's a fun format, and we can be loose and then talk about all things identity. I think the community you've built up has been fantastic. It's been fun to watch the podcast grow. This is a great way to kind of let people know what's new in the land of FIDO.
Yeah, it keeps growing. We've got a live studio audience. They're off camera, but they might have questions as they're going. They're also guarding the door to make sure that noisy things try to stay outside. But yes, thank you also to our guests for being here. But yeah, it continues to grow. It's crazy. And you were one of our early supporters coming through. So that also is part of the process, right? Of going through those 7 episodes, like that's been spaced out over.
When you come in early, you can kind of pad your numbers, pad my stats.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm up to 7, so it's fantastic. Secret strategy.
So, Andrew, I mean, FIDO Alliance is obviously growing. I mean, your team's growing. From what I hear, the memberships are growing. Give us a little bit of an idea of the kind of growth you've experienced at FIDO Alliance.
Yeah, I mean, so the Alliance is growing. Our objective, growth is not an objective for the Alliance in and of itself. It's really a byproduct of what's happening in the marketplace. Our goal as Alliance is to reduce identity-related fraud in the market. Right, and most of that comes from passwords, which is why we've been so focused on reducing reliance on passwords in favor of passkeys. And our approach to this, we've been working on this for over 10 years now. And it has been a very mature, robust technology that's being implemented at scale. And as we introduced the concept of passkeys 2 years ago, things have really just taken off from there. And so what we're seeing is that people are adopting and using the technology at scale. Our membership has grown. Largely because people want to be involved, right? They want to be involved in understanding how are the specifications evolving. They want to be involved in some of our deployment working groups to understand and establish best practices on how to implement FIDO in different settings. They want to lean into our user experience stuff, and that's a big growth area for us as UX, as we are not just releasing real kind of watershed UX guidelines for the industry to use to make sure that you implement FIDO correctly and passkeys correctly, but also inside that group, we have product leads and design leads who are, again, sharing, learning from each other on what's the best way to use this relatively new technology of synced passkeys. So for all those reasons, we are growing as a membership, but also our remit is growing, right? So yes, we're focused on user authentication, but we're also looking at the adjacent areas, which matter a lot as well, right? So one of those is in connected devices. So we have a specification called FIDO Device Onboard, which is all about onboarding devices and taking the password out of play there as well for connected devices, such that as soon as they come online to a network, they automatically dial home, if you will, and are immediately onboard, which is more secure and more efficient than individually configuring each device on a, say, smart meters or for automotive or things like that. And then our certification program continues to grow as well. Certification to me has always been the thing that makes standards actionable. All right, so our FIDO certified program initially only focused on user authentication products, but it made sure that if you're a licensing party, that these things work together. So you have a FIDO 2 server, it'll work with any FIDO certified authenticator, because we don't just test conformance to the spec, but also that these products work together. So we do interop testing for this. But even that program has grown from the remit of just user authentication certification to we have a standalone biometric performance certification program, and we have newer work in identity verification, including an announcement we had here at Identiverse, announcing our face verification certification program that we launched just the other day.
So you're verifying people's faces.
We're verifying the performance of the products that are verifying people's faces. So again, if you're licensing software from someone, a lot of this ID work, whether you're doing document authenticity or face verification, has been kind of a black box. And the vendor says, I do this really well, and here's my performance numbers, but there's not been a way to independently verify that and certify that. And so now with our certification program for the IDV face work, for example, that the vendor who's done this has met certain thresholds for biometric performance. So meaning like false accept rate, false reject rate, attack detection. But also the other wrinkle we have in there is bias. And so you can't talk about biometric authentication without talking about the bias challenge. And so we're testing for bias. You need to exceed a certain threshold to demonstrate that your product is not lending to bias in order to be certified. So we think this is a really important program, and that as companies who are involved in doing more rigorous ID proofing of employees or maybe even of consumers, they will want to look for companies that have passed this mark.
I think this certification program is, in my mind, a lot of what's needed, because FIDO, like zero trust, like AI, is becoming an adjective. You walk around the vendor hall, you're talking about, it's just dropping a sentence. We're FIDO compliant. And how would you actually know if somebody's FIDO compliant, right? They have a sample approval from the FIDO Alliance.
Yes.
Makes total sense. Otherwise, it could just be, and we're zero trust compliant. Just believe me.
Yeah, and so that's why the certified program is so important. And look, we launched a certified program in 2016. So we have over 1,000 user authentication products certified, and I love that number. What I love more than that is seeing FIDO certified being a staple part of more and more RFPs coming out. And so in different deployment scenarios for workforce, for government, for consumers, so our vendors are getting these RFPs saying you must be FIDO certified, which is great. because that again builds trust in the ecosystem and builds opportunity in the ecosystem. And we have vendors who have all sorts of innovations. They compete with each other, but all of them have a slightly different lean on things and bring different value to the table. And this allows them to have the common thread of being FIDO certified, which allows them all to potentially be used by different licensing parties.
And I think that, look, I certainly wasn't trying to criticize people from wanting to be FIDO compliant. It's just what I wanted to know was, is there any teeth to that? Does it actually have a meaning?
I would say it has to mean something.
It has to mean something.
Yeah, that's what it means. So to be FIDO certified, for user authentication products, you conform to the specifications. And most standards have a self-conformance test where you say, I conform to this spec, and that's great, but we do that so there's a self-conformance test. We build test tools you use to show that your product adheres to the spec. But on top of that, you're also going through interop testing. So that there's a live test where you must test against other products in the value chain to show that these things work together. And ultimately, if I am a purchasing company, that's part of what I want. I want to make sure that I'm not being locked into a vendor, but I am being future-proofed. And so when I buy when I license a FIDO certified product, I know that these things are true. So there is teeth behind it.
Yeah, and, I'm sorry. How many products is it by product or by vendor that are certified?
Over 1,000 products from hundreds of vendors. I don't know the exact number of vendors.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So each product goes through this verification cycle process.
So like Ubico, for example, has probably 25 or maybe more FIDO certified security keys.
How do you validate, I guess, remaining in compliance? Is it something where, I mean, we're in a software defined world now, right? Where version upgrade comes out. I certainly understand a hardware certification, but software certification, is that something out there too? And how do you address that?
People need to recertify
Every time.
So there's a recertification process for software products.
Okay.
And so that's going to come more to the fore for this identity verification work that we're doing. There will be recertification every couple of years to make sure that we're still in compliance.
So this was announced yesterday.
Yes.
You spoke about this here at Identiverse.
I did.
What other exciting things are happening at Identiverse that kind of pique your mind as guiding FIDO?
I mean, with my FIDO lens on, which is really my only lens, I guess, I was thrilled to see how much people are talking about passkeys. I counted 16 sessions that have passkey in the title and dozens more sure that have passkeys in the content. And it's fantastic. We collectively as an alliance and all of our members, I'm talking about thousands of people worldwide, have been on this journey. And the community is, our FIDO community, it truly is a remarkable bunch of people. It's remarkably supportive, collaborative, and it's good to see all the efforts that everyone's put into this being rewarded by the realization that the broader identity community sees what we've built as so integral to what they're looking to deploy. So I've been thrilled by that, especially the passkey piece. 2 years ago, we introduced passkeys right before Identiverse. When we came here, it was a firestorm and a lot of concerns. Because the FIDO security model for the first time was changing slightly, or being augmented slightly to allow the private key to leave a device and to be synchronized across the cloud. And that raised consternation and concern for some people and some skepticism as to whether or not that would ever take root. And so it's been great to see, again, the community kind of keep their heads down and focus on making sure that our passkey ecosystem is open, inclusive, and then working just to focus on the benefits of how this can be used. And then you're seeing these massive rollouts that keep on coming every week. There's someone new rolling out passkeys. So today I was on stage with Amazon. So Mike Slaw joined me on stage and talked about how they have tens of millions of Amazon customers enrolled in passkeys. Tens of millions, right? And then one of their success metrics is over a 15% increase in sign-in success rate. Amazon runs like a 1% margin, I think. And so if you're increasing the sign-in success rate by 1%, I think that's going to move the needle on their bottom line. 15%, it has to be making meaningful impact to their margins and to their bottom line, which is great.
And that success rate really is talking about people who can't get logged in. They need support or they need faster way to get in, right?
Exactly. And it's not to say that the 15% of the people who are not getting that. Well, so say the number of the sign-in success rate, hypothetically, this is not their number. Say with passwords is 75%, and then with passkeys is 90%. The 25% of people with passwords not getting in before, a lot of them would go through a reset and get signed in, but some of them probably wouldn't, and they'd leave. So that's a very meaningful number. But we're seeing that number time and time again for people who are sharing data on how passkeys are working. And the two most common metrics, one is success rate and time to sign in. And oftentimes being compared to legacy 2FA like SMS OTP. And in both instances, both numbers are improving. And so I mentioned that there's always someone new, coming in and rolling out. Like, I was thrilled to see Amazon. I was thrilled to see PlayStation and Microsoft. And I was staying in the hallway. Someone from a major online service just came up to me and said, "Hey, I loved your talk. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be rolling this out to 20 million consumers." So, so it's the proof's in the pudding. again, the work and the focus that everyone in the Alliance has put into building the core foundations of FIDO authentication, developing the use cases and the best practices for how to do this. The UX work we're doing, which really paints a picture on how to drive and optimize enrollment flow for passkeys and management flow for passkeys. All those things are leading to the success that we're seeing in market. So, the coolest thing I've seen is all that, which is the fruits of the labor that everyone's put into the work that FIDO Alliance has done.
Yeah, you actually just stole my next question, which was going to be, I've seen Kevin Goldman around at the conference this year.
Yeah.
To me, it's like, if the user experience isn't good, then the whole thing kind of sits on a weak foundation. But the user experience, like, you guys have put so much effort and investment into that.
Kevin's been transformational, and the work that group has done has been transformational. And it's really cool to see. So that they had they did not have a master class. Take it back. They had a 30-minute session to introduce the guidelines. It should have been a master class. I'm not complaining, but it should have been because it was overflowing. And they had 25 minutes to talk about the guidelines.
There's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of documentation on that.
It is so deep.
Yeah.
So I'd encourage people to go to our site, FIDOalliance.org/UX guidelines.
I'll get the link and I'll put it in our show.
Or just search FIDO UX guidelines. We have pretty good search stuff. But the depth of content there is amazing. And this is and what's been really cool about that group is that for those standards geeks who are listening to this, you understand how standards work. You get standards work. You get a bunch of really bright people in a room to who are experts in their field to talk about protocols and argue about where semicolons fit and shall versus musts. We have the same practice here with UX, but instead of engineers, we have designers and messaging experts and UX leads and human interface leads, and they've all collaborated remarkably to scope the research that has led to our guidelines and to refine the guidelines and actually develop a UI kit, which is freely available too. So the resources that this brain trust has put into the UX work that we have, the design work that we have is phenomenal. And it's an incredible resource for people to use. And one thing I find gratifying, I know that the UX group finds gratifying, is when I talk to someone who's deployed and said, yeah, of course I use your guidelines. And it's super helpful. So yeah, we feel really good about that work too.
And it's free. It's on the web. It's not like it's gated behind anything, right? I think people can get to it.
It's all free.
Yeah.
It's all free.
There's no reason not to use it.
There's no business interest. And so we will be expanding. That's one of our key themes as an alliance is enablement. What can we do? What can we do to enable people? So whether it's usability pieces or other assets that we will be developing and rolling out over the next couple of months, it's all about helping people get to yes and get to deploy. But coming back to your key point, Jimmy, usability is key. And I've said this for years. If your MFA is unusable, it won't get used. So your consumers won't opt in, and employees will work around it. But what we heard today in the session that I did is that both sides of the equation are super important. Right? Our tagline is simpler, stronger authentication. So yes, it needs to be simple, but it needs to be strong too. So Bank of America talked about why they came to FIDO purely from a security standpoint. They want to stop the threat of social engineering that imposed to hundreds of thousands of employees around the world, which they've done by rolling out FIDO. Throughout the organization, 97% of their employees are not using passwords, they're using different forms of FIDO authentication.
That's fantastic.
Which means that security threat has been thwarted.
Yeah, this might seem like a down in the weeds question, but I think one of the things when we had MFA but not FIDO yet, or not in the form that it's in now, so we could say MFA on, you must use MFA. Can you do the same thing with passkeys? Can you make it? Because every time I kind of go through the flow with, more and more, you're seeing passkeys more and more. It's always, do you want to use this instead of passwords? And I kind of think that's because some people don't want to change, period. They'd rather take the risk of passwords. But if I want to make passkeys required, is that too down in the weeds of a question?
No, I'll try. So tell me if I get off track of my answer. That'll be an answer to your question if that's too in the weeds. No, I think that, a couple things there. one thing you'll hear me say a lot is that we need to reframe the way we think about authentication. And the only frame of reference anyone's ever had on authentication is how to make passwords suck less. Right? Passwords are horrible. Everyone knows they're horrible, so we add on layers. We do MFA, and that's been the answer is to add on layers. And all our regulations, most regulations to date have been about how to do MFA. And they never contemplated a true password replacement, and passkeys are that. Right? So we have a question in the audience.
Yeah, come on up to the microphone.
So I guess I do. You're heading down that path. With Bank of America that talked to this morning, and then I think it was your talk yesterday.
Yeah.
The one of the myths that you put in, I think in yesterday's talk, was that regulators from the banking side don't go FIDO or don't like the FIDO. I'm interested in that conversation, because that is definitely the conversation that I have to have next. Is how do I convince FDIC, who is traditionally running off of 2016 guidelines?
Yes.
How do you get it? How do you make that buy-in?
Yes. So there's a couple of things here. There's regulators and compliance officers. Oh my. So I mentioned regulations. So when I introduced passkeys 2 years ago, there's a lot of pushback. Like, well, this is different. This is scary. This is people aren't going to buy it. Regulators are going to hate it. There's no regulations. My point of talking about the frame of reference is that any regulations on the books today were developed thinking about how to prevent the damage of passwords. But now there's passkeys as a password alternative. And so NIST supplemental guidance 863B, I think, was a good step in that direction, which basically said that if you implemented synced credentials or synced passkeys, according to their guidance, that it meets AL2 and can be considered unphishable. And then CISA came up with their own statement talking about using synced passkeys as a form of 2FA, right? So in full stop, I think a passkey is going to be as effective more effective than SMS OTP, the legacy form of 2FA. Now, for super high assurance scenarios, you'll want to use a device-bound passkey. But there's wrinkles in all this stuff, right? So I think going back to your question, how do we talk to? So a couple of things. So I think the NIST guidance is going to be a really important milestone, and we'll see other regulators start to follow suit. And we have a very active policy engagement program where we engage with policymakers worldwide. We'll point them to this, they're aware of this, and I think that as they're updating their own guidelines and guidance and regulations in countries all over the world, that they'll start following suit and start thinking about, well, if you're using passkeys, then this. If you're using passwords, then you must do traditional MFA. So I think these things can coexist. And I think guidance will come out that points to passkeys specifically. Now, going as far as banking goes in a regulated industry, the question remains, well, how do I roll a sync passkeys to consumers when I don't know about the provenance of the passkey provider, or I don't even know for sure that's Andrew on that device because it's synced? These are legitimate questions too. And so my answer there is a couple-fold. One, every platform provider who's active inside of FIDO Alliance is deeply committed to addressing high assurance scenarios with sync passkeys. Right? So that will happen. It's a matter of how we get there, what the technical solution is, and when they choose to support that in their platforms. But a lot of banks I'm talking to today, even with that understanding, with that challenge, they don't necessarily have all they want. They're choosing not to let the perfect get in the way of the good, and going back to their compliance officers and saying, well, chief, even if I use a passkey as a password equivalent, if I treat them one for one, I'm in a much better place taking a passkey as a primary factor than I was with password as a primary factor. So it might be initially, as we see banks rolling out passkeys cautiously, maybe they start with passkeys just for signing, and then maybe they do some sort of setup for higher value transactions. Or if you think about this, at the end of the day, these are all signals. Right? Everyone has a risk engine, and then these are all different types of signals that they have. And so maybe you lean more under other signals than you lean under passkey signals for now. But as the passkey itself has more and more trust signals embedded in it, you can dial down other signals. I don't think that any regulated entity would ever trust a passkey in and of itself. Just they wouldn't trust any other single authentication credential without doing added risk modeling and things like that. So again, I think we're super happy with the supplemental guidance from NIST. I think that will help accelerate and cajole more conscious entities into starting to support passkeys for their consumers as well.
Do you think situations like the FIDO certification helps that case made? Say, are there other organizations waiting for that to be in place to say, okay, there's a little more assurance that.
So one thing we want to do is, so the program we have in the books is a certified passkey provider program. Mm-hmm. And so it's a legitimate concern from some entities. Like, how do I know that the person managing these passkeys how do I know their business is good? All right. So maybe it's, I'll trust Apple and Google because they're known entities and I trust their security. But if Joe's passkey provider is managing Andrew's passkey, why would I accept that? Mm-hmm. And so the program we're putting in place is a certified passkey provider program, which will certify that the manager of these passkeys is taking the requisite steps to protect their cloud, encrypt cloud, protect the keys and all those things, such that once certified, that the relying party should have more confidence in that passkey provider. So I think that's something from a certification front that we intend to deliver, which can help.
So yeah, I'm sorry, let me interrupt right there on the certification. Who would conduct the certification? How do you foresee the mechanics of something like that? Because that sounds pretty involved.
Yeah, so we have a very robust certification program. We manage certain certifications in-house and some with third-party labs. And so typically we talked about how user authentication certification works, where you do self-conformance testing, we verify that, and then we do an interop test. On top of that, actually, we have secretariats. You will do a vendor questionnaire to do further rigor on the vendor itself to make sure that everything's up to snuff. So for the certified passkey provider program, it would be more of that piece where we are assessing this. Like there's a vendor questionnaire. There will be some conformance, like some physical tests also, the authenticator tests on how they're actually performing. And those are all things that we can manage in-house. Now, where our certification gets more complex is with biometrics, where there are third-party labs. So biometric testing is incredibly complex, incredibly expensive to set up, and so we work with third-party labs to do those tests. And so we do these in conjunction with third-party labs, and typically the vendor will come to us with their vendor statement. They then work with the lab to go through the test for whatever they are testing. They come back to us for the certification and the management of that certification there.
Well, that just kind of shows the value of being certified in spending all that money to go to a lab and do all these things must be pretty important.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, certifications are driven by two things. The most important one is customer demand. Customers want to see certification, especially again in regulated industry. Compliance is key. And so if it's like they want to be able to go to the compliance officers and say, look, this is FIDO biometric certified or IDV certified, whatever it is, that's very important to have any certification. Of course, the rigor of the certification is important, but having that certification is critical. So the customer demand for certification is one component. The other thing is, as I said, we have 1,000-something FIDO certified products, and we have hundreds of vendors who are in the FIDO community. Certification could be an area of differentiation as well. Right. So for our authenticators, hardware authenticators, we actually have higher levels of security certification they can do, like L1, L2, L3. And so we see companies going through that both in response to demand, but also in able to differentiate themselves from their competition.
I think we had another question here.
Yeah, Andrew Robert Peller with Tyson Foods. Yesterday, the CEO of Ping started out with a deep fake video.
Yeah.
So how is the FIDO Alliance's face verification addressing being able to prevent deep fakes like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the evil Andres. There's Andres two evil Andres. Evil Andres, I love that. So part of what the certification, IDV certification, the face verification certification program does is look at liveness. So on those videos were not great liveness, but they kind of showed how they could be manipulated. But beyond that, there's things that the vendors are checking for that are a lot more subtle, like shadowing, They could flash a bright light or something like that, to look for a reflection on the face. There's all sorts of things that they do that frankly I don't fully understand, that the vendors do, and that we test for also to ensure liveness. So liveness is more than just moving your head or saying a catchphrase, although those are also really important elements of liveness detection as well.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not a robot. Yeah, this is exactly what a robot would say.
Yeah, exactly.
So Authenticate is coming up later this year. We're looking forward to seeing you again in Carlsbad.
Yes.
What can we expect for folks who haven't been to Authenticate? One, it's awesome.
Yes.
But tell people why they should be there, other than to see us and you.
Yeah, well, that's probably the reason not to come. Not me, that's the reason to come, of course, is to see us. But it's look, if you want to lean into learning more about authentication and FIDO, this is the place to go. I love Identiverse. I love the broader identity community, and it's a great place to learn. And a lot of like Identiverse Authenticate, the sessions are fantastic, but the hallway con is even better. Mm-hmm. I mentioned before about our community. Now I've been involved in a number of standards, and I've never been involved in a standard where people really genuinely want to help each other. Mm. They want to help each other, and they want to help new entrants and people who are new to this. They want to help everyone be successful. And that's what happens on Authenticate. It sounds so cheesy, but it really is a remarkably warm, encouraging, and supportive community. And I think you see that. You guys have been in the past couple of years. You see that in spades at Authenticate. But I had companies who I know who have deployed. They always say to me, so I oftentimes connect them with someone else who has successfully implemented FIDO, and they kind of want to pass it on. Mm-hmm. And so people are always willing to, what's the term?
Collaborate?
No, it's not collaborate. There's a movie called whatever, like Pass It On or something. But
got me now. I don't know.
Anyway, people are willing to.
There's a movie. I'm sure somebody in the comments like, it's this.
It wasn't a great movie, but it was the whole idea of you spread the wealth, mm-hmm. And so there's this willingness to help each other kind of bootstrap your own knowledge and get engaged. So that's a long-winded way of saying it's a great place to learn. It's also fantastic.
Pay it forward.
So pay it forward. Thank
there we go. Jim to the rescue.
Pay it forward. So people like to pay it forward. And the individual actually said this to me, I'd like to pay it forward. Please connect me with someone who has the same use case as me. But that's amazing. Mm-hmm. You don't see that with other standards, So I think that speaks to a couple of things. And I'll come back to Authenticate in a second. But I think that spirit of community speaks to the magnitude of the mission that we have and the challenge at hand. No one's ever said, yeah, you guys are why get rid of passwords? They're so awesome. Everyone understands the challenge.
Said nobody ever.
Said no one ever. And there's a sense of, this collective, the collective will is the only way to make this happen, which also speaks to the fact why we have so many of the right companies sitting together doing this. So Apple, Google, Microsoft, that's pretty cool. But then the next layer down, fierce competitors all working side by side to make this happen. Yeah. So I think the magnitude of the task at hand leads to the spirit of collaboration that we have, which is also manifested at Authenticate. Authenticate itself is in Carlsbad, California, which is beautiful. For anyone who's not living in southern climes in October, I'd recommend coming early. It's actually, for some, it's a holiday weekend, but you can certainly come out and enjoy the setting at the resort. There will be some activities even starting as early as Sunday, kicking off Monday afternoon. We'll have great social activities. It's just a really fun time and a fun place to learn about all things FIDO. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to see the three of us.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I could definitely vouch for the weather. In fact, when you said it's a warm environment, I was thinking, yeah, San Diego is warm, especially compared to Seattle, where it used to be.
Yeah. Well, I got a big kick out of it, because last year's our first year in that venue. And frankly, I wasn't sure I was going to go, but what made me so happy was walking around and seeing what's called a bunch of authenticators. Mm-hmm. All the Authenticate attendees, mm-hmm. Sitting in little groups throughout the resort. There's all these cool places to hang out and be in the sun, enjoy the outdoors in between sessions, and just getting to know each other and comparing notes. It's a really cool environment.
There's a word that comes to mind, and I was thinking about this the other day. I was kind of describing the Authenticate conference to someone else, encouraging them to come out, and it was the word fellowship.
Yes.
It's very much a community, and I think a lot of people in the identity community really start to recognize this. You're here at Identiverse, and it's almost like a high school reunion every year, right? You're seeing the same faces and the names, and hey, how you doing? And maybe you don't know each other's names yet, but you start to recognize the same people.
It's,
right?
It's very similar to that. And we've, to be clear, we've had a nice collaboration with the Identiverse team on this as well. So when we first came up with the idea of Authenticate, the first people I talked to were Andre and Andy. And I want to make it very clear, we want this to be complementary to what's happening at Identiverse, be part of that community. So we have a really nice working relationship with this conference and now CRA as well. So I think it really does help continue the conversations that are happening there, 6 months down the road.
Yeah, definitely. And tagging on to what you're talking about, seeing old faces, high school reunion, making new friends. A couple of our friends here are from Tyson Foods, and we're talking about, before we hit record, we're talking about, the different types of work environments that exist. They've got a plant with where they speak 40 different languages within one plant. And so that gets me to thinking about these different scenarios I've run into over time, like clean rooms. And one of the odd ones I remember was like a prison. You can't bring your phone into a prison, right? So how do you manage that from an authenticator standpoint? And that's why there has to be this wide variety. And I wouldn't say FIDO Alliance is a platform, it's a standard, right? But it allows companies to go out and innovate in that area, come up with an authenticator that meets a need that others don't. And one of the coolest ones that I run into, so here comes the question. The cool thing that I ran into was an authenticator that used your brain waves through your ear. So you'd wear some kind of headphone.
How deep in your ear?
I don't know the answer to that, but it
It's like
must
a science fiction
somehow
movie.
pick up on brain waves. And I guess they are like an individual signature. I thought that was innovative. I wasn't sure what the use case would be, but then I heard about other different ones like bracelets and things like that. I'm wondering, Andrew, what bio-authenticator have you run into that really rings a bell as wow, that's something different?
So yes, we don't specify biometric modalities, but like early on, there's one of the bracelet that looked at your pulse, which I believe is different for everybody.
Wow.
So pulse, temperature, things like that. There's all sorts of. I'm not an expert in biometrics, but there's all sorts of things that you can pick up on, and I think it. But since we don't specify modalities, it allows for this innovation in form factors for different use cases. And so, I think there's a lot out there. If someone brings something totally new and off the wall, we have a kind of process for making sure that this actually can be quantified. But generally, it's pretty open book for people to innovate on top of. But some of the scenarios you're talking about, OT or in the prisons or things like that, these are real scenarios too. Like NCCOE, which is an effort out of NIST, a couple of years ago did something for first responders, and they liked FIDO having multiple modalities because if you are a first responder and you have gloves on, you can't use your gloves, you can use a fingerprint, but you can't use your iris. So there's certain scenarios where you need to have other various modalities to be available for signing.
I think that's so cool that there's a standard out there and it enables innovation to build around the standard. Build your own business around kind of this innovation that you come up with that solves certain use cases.
Yeah.
Another question from the audience. Come on up.
This is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, Derek Roberts, also with Tyson Foods. To us, some of the challenges I think to adding FIDO keys into the environment is this other device that's being added. You talk about adding layers to passwords, or just adding more layers of devices that people have to carry with them. Is there any efforts to be added to, let's embed them into wearables, things that people already have, and that can now become the authentication factor instead of, here's another key in your company and a key for this company.
Yeah.
You have to have all these things. There are any efforts into helping simplify that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, so yes. I think in general, if you're looking at your workforce, redundancy might be a good strategy to have. Right, so give someone a security key. They can also use, if you're a Windows shop, use Windows Hello. Some of the functionality built into Windows Hello for Business, stuff like that, in addition to security key. We have a lot of companies now offering these mixed-use badges. So your badge that gets you in the door is also your badge that signs you into your computer. So you're not necessarily adding something else in. You could also use your devices, security key, documents or rings, like there are wearables. I mean, for the workforce setting, a lot of this comes down to policy and permissions. But there certainly are ways to to manage this. But in the workforce, the best practice is to have, or if you're using security keys, to have two. You should always have two security keys in case you lose one. So have one on you, one in a safe place. That's also part of where passkeys go in, like sync passkeys go into play. In the sense that it synchronizes that, but you have, again, lower assurance associated with that, but more redundancy.
Mm-hmm. And the choice is good, right? We need to have choices to be able to address different parts of the market and people and, accessibility, right? And all that stuff. So even the brainwave stuff, which I kind of joked about, there's, the Neuralink patient, right, is doing amazing things with that technology. Yeah. Like there's a use case for something like that.
There is. And everyone's like, especially talk about the enterprise, like Tyson's a huge company. Shane Wheaton from IBM is giving a talk tomorrow about IBM going passwordless. And, they support a range of things from sync passkeys to security keys to Windows Low and apps and things like that. So I think, and even Sean's for BMA talking about it, he didn't get into details on what they're doing, but I know they have a blend of apps and keys and badges. Mm-hmm. So I think the idea is kind of meet your users where they are as much as you can, and let them use, so long as it stays in compliance with your own corporate requirements, try to meet them where they are with a better chance of them actually using it and de-risking. The whole goal here is from the workforce standpoint, or a goal is getting rid of risk and better security with better usability. Mm-hmm. So meeting them where they are, that's really important.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for coming up and stepping up to the mic for sure. We're going to wrap things up here. We end on a lighter note.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question that I've been dying to ask you for a long time.
Usually you give me these in advance.
I do, but not today.
Not today.
Yeah. What's your favorite song by the band Heart?
Oh, come on.
I'm just kidding. This is a callback. You have to go back to listen to episode 1 if you want to do that. Right, exactly. No, but what's been the most memorable Identiverse experience for you this year? Is there something that sticks out?
The whole show it's been a blur. Mm-hmm. Just remember, I'll have to think back on memories as I get a chance to.
This is why it's at the end. It's kind of like a gut reation, visceral type of
I'll
thing.
tell you, one of my favorite things was sitting in Andrew Cameron's talk about GM, and Andrew gets to talk every year about how GM does identity. Mm-hmm. But he mentioned passkeys. Like, of course, we're doing passkeys.
Yeah, like it's of course. Like, what do you mean?
Like table stakes,
right?
And to me, like for someone like Andrew to say something like that was really cool to see that, mm-hmm. where it's become table stakes or become an expectation. So that was one of the first sessions I sat in, if not the first one I sat in, mm-hmm. and was a very early thrill for me.
Oh, inside you're like, yes.
Yeah, it was great. And again, it comes back to people have worked so hard inside the Alliance. Mm-hmm. And again, there's so much passion, so much dedication. And so to see all that work transferred into people using the outputs of all that labor is extremely rewarding. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a fantastic alliance. The people in it are top notch. We've been following it for the last couple of years, right, as part of the podcast. And to see the adoption go from, we think this might work, to, oh my gosh, it's working. Right? People are starting to use it.
Everybody's doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes of course, it's like no brainer type stuff.
No, that's great. So we're happy. There's still work to be done. Mm-hmm. Right? There's always room to improve. And there's work to be done, a lot of work to be done. But like I say, we're making passkeys inevitable. I firmly believe that. Mm-hmm. And we're committed to making that happen.
Excellent. Should we wrap up, or do you want to bring up something?
Yeah, no, I don't have something, but I just had a question bubble up in my mind. Do you guys have your naysayers?
Yeah. But not like, hey, we think passwords are, well, there are those two.
That's a big password for you.
People like passwords, right? Any survey you do of consumers, around 30% of them say, I got this password thing nailed. I have a great formula. You're going to pry my passwords from cold fish cans. Yeah. So there's those naysayers, but people like naysayers about what FIDO Alliance is doing, not so much. Or there's some consternation around, again, the syncing of the private key and what that meant from a security posture. But again, I think that's just something we're going to work through and improve upon. It's interesting. I was talking to some people this week. If the FIDO story, the WebAuthn story, if the arc began 2 years ago when we introduced passkeys.
Mhm.
We started there with, of course, by default, they sync. And that was the expectation. The thing about consumerized IT, things generally start simple and get more complex. So this all started 2 years ago. People will be thrilled. There wouldn't be any consternation at all. But there's a prehistory to this, of course, which is all the great work we did with FIDO2 beforehand, with Authn, where you had some of those, a little more assurance and more details on the device and on the user. So it's that prehistory that people want to get back to. That's understandable.
Wow.
Right? And we'll get there. Again, there's deep commitment to fully supporting those high assurance scenarios by the platforms and by the passkey providers, and we will get there. And so again, any naysayers are more about like that. So that frustration that we had this, in their mind, the perfect scenario for FIDO from a security standpoint, but ultimately what we saw was that was not the perfect scenario from a usability standpoint, right? And the data proves that out. Right? We talk about 13 billion accounts being capable to use passkeys. That would not have happened if we never changed this model.
Yeah.
And our goal is to reduce reliance on passwords at planet scale. And so simply is not possible without allowing this key to be more readily available.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, I'm going to give you a shout out. My most memorable moment was, it's not a moment really, but I was just so impressed with the panel that you hosted.
No.
I think it was a microcosm of what the various sessions were like here, right? You got into kind of that level of detail and people were geeking out and talking about this CAPE protocol.
Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol.
And what I thought was so cool is like the level of geeking out and the room was pretty packed.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, microcosm of what's going on. I think advice out there for folks who are considering this conference next year is, you can go anywhere from engineer level all the way up to business executive level, and there's content for you, for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, that panel was all Sean, Shane,
You asked great questions.
Tim, and Atul. I was just the good looks for it.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but I was going to say you asked the right questions.
No, it was a lot of fun, and hopefully people learned some things. And I think there's probably a replay somewhere out there. I think they're doing stuff around that. But it was a good time. I'm happy to do that. It seems to start to become my thing, is moderating panels, which if you'd asked me a year ago, like, no way am I getting on stage. I'll talk in front of a microphone or do a podcast, but
Very natural.
yes, stand up there. No, you're crazy. So we all are working on something, but thank you very much. And you were in the back in your red jacket. You're very easy to
you
spot.
gave me the shout out, and people were like, whoa, I almost got a standing ovation for the jacket.
Yeah. It was a good time. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up there. Andrew.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We'll have links in our show notes to FIDOalliance.org. Check out the great work, the UX guidelines, all that stuff is out there. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com. Yes, the YouTube link, youtube.com/@IDACpodcast. Mastodon at IDAC at infosec.exchange, and then Twitter, X, whatever it's called now, at IDAC Podcast.
Or if people need like the easy button, go into your podcast app or go into YouTube and search for Identity at the Center.
Yeah, man. Like, subscribe, do a lot of fun stuff. We're starting to do video. This is our first conference with cameras and stuff like that. And thank you for people showing up and actually watching how this madness, looks like behind the scenes, that kind of thing. So with that, leave it there. Thanks everybody for watching and or listening. Thank you, Andrew, again.
Okay.
And we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.